Business Leadership South Africa's CEO Busisiwe Mavuso says the country's BRICS membership shouldn't come at the expense of our relationship with the West. She says these trade relations are vital for the country's economic well-being. Mavuso joins us now for more on her opinion piece. Good to have you, and thank you very much for coming on tonight here on In Focus. Minister of Women, Children, Youth and People with Disabilities is gathering young people of BRICS there in Durban. And she chooses to use this opportunity, as a political leader, to say, these young people and give them some political guidance, and says, take an anti-imperialist stance as you are gathering here. And I look at what anti-imperialist stance mean. In other words, oppose colonialism, oppose colonial empowers, oppose hegemony. And you come and you say, no, you've hit the wrong notes. Why?
She definitely has, Thabo. You see, I think we need to be careful as a country, and I think statements like those coming from ministers are actually very dangerous and irresponsible, to say the least. You see, the BRICS bloc is definitely a positive opportunity for South Africa, and it is right for our government to cultivate relationships with BRICS. So that is not under question. India and China in particular are huge and fast-growing markets that South African businesses can benefit from, and that is not in dispute. The opportunities that the East presents for South Africa are crucial, but let's be clear and acknowledge the importance of our relations with the West, which are very essential to our economic well-being. We need to be careful, Thabo, that our relationship with BRICS should not mean staining relations, not just with the West, but with everyone else. The comments, therefore, by the minister were rather unfortunate. South Africa needs to be careful to not use BRICS as a competitive tool against the West, because that was not the reason why we joined the bloc in the first place. Our involvement in the alliance is simply designed to enhance the development and cooperation amongst member countries, and South Africa stands to benefit a great deal from BRICS, especially with the proposed enlargement of the bloc. It is going to enable us, as a country, to extend our global influence and strengthen our trade ties with a range of powerful emerging market economies, and that's brilliant. It therefore was rather irresponsible for the minister to suggest, that we are using BRICS as a means to accelerate the downfall of an unjust imperialist world order, because that is simply not true, and that is precisely not what we're doing. If you listened to that speech, Thabo, you would have heard that, ironically, in the same speech, the minister lamented those who prefer us shipping raw materials rather than manufactured goods to the world. But she failed to acknowledge that our relations with India and China in particular are tremendously characterized by South Africa exporting raw materials and importing manufactured goods. And I think there's probably maybe nothing wrong with that at the moment, because we are in a transition of making sure that we can actually add more value add, in terms of the goods that we actually export. So she ignored that it is Europe and the US that import by far the majority of our manufactured goods.
She seems to be emphasizing, I suppose, what also the Deputy President would have said, the notion that says, because the West has got economic power, it doesn't mean now we must be bullied and find ourselves having to choose between the two parties. In fact, the Deputy President saying it's unacceptable, this particular notion.
And I absolutely agree with that. But we're going to have to ask the question of, what does bullying mean in this instance? How do we feel we were bullied by the U.S.? Because I think those comments, came from, I don't know what precipitated them. If bullying by the U.S., is the U.S. requesting that we give clarity on Lady R, then I don't know how that can actually be characterized as bullying, because business would like to have those answers as well. The Simonstown episode has needed an explanation, Thabo, since it took place. Even if the arms were not loaded onto that ship, the fact that it docked at all, particularly in a military facility with the transponder turned off, was ill-advised. It is now imperative that government clears up this mess. At the moment, we just came from a delegation that was led by the Minister of Trade and Industry and Competition to the U.S. Congress to try and make sure that we can salvage AGOA. Now, can you see how the left is not talking to the right in the country, or in as far as government is concerned? Because if the West is irrelevant or not that important, then what was the point of the exercise of taking the entire delegation to try and make sure that we salvage AGOA? On the very same breath or a week later, we are making those comments. We're in a very difficult period at the moment, not just from the U.S., but by the entire world. They are looking to see what the committee that has been set up on Lady R is actually going to produce, because the issue of Lady R has not just upset the U.S., it has actually upset a lot of countries in the world.
But you don't see that particular issue of AGOA as a use of economic power, because America knows very well what that trade relationship means monetarily to South African businesses, and they are using that to muscle their way into South Africa's international relations policy.
AGOA is simply a legislation that provides duty-free access and grants qualifying countries exports preferential access to the huge U.S. market. And the legislation has been central to building our exports, ranging from vehicles and citrus fruit. South Africa is currently the largest single beneficiary country under AGOA, with over 290 billion rands of exports to the U.S. in 2021 and nearly $1 billion in the first 3 months of this year. 25% of our exports go to the U.S. and 15% of the vehicle exports so far have gone there. So if we don't think that, I'm just saying this, Thabo, to say that we are benefiting from AGOA. So if we don't think AGOA is important, then it's okay, it's fine. Let's allow AGOA to go. Let's be at peace with the fact that we're going to lose AGOA and probably start putting interventions in place to see how we're actually going to deal with the huge economic impact and the dire financial consequences that we're actually going to have to face as a country who are going to lose this benefit. There is no denying, Thabo, that a loss of this trade relationship would mean billions of rands in economic activity, as well as tens of thousands of jobs, which depend on those exports, which are going to be lost. It's going to be devastating for employment. It is going to leave our economy far more reliant on raw material exports to other developing countries. So AGOA, therefore, is more a benefit to South Africa than it is a benefit to the U.S. So I really don't understand, that they can't therefore be saying, because you're giving us AGOA, then you're actually trying to make us dance to your tune. I don't think that is what is happening here. The U.S. has actually raised the issue of South Africa's stance against Russia. And they're saying, are you neutral or not? Because if you are neutral, then act it. Because at the moment, Thabo, nothing in what we have done in as far as Russia is concerned screams neutrality. In the contrary, it actually opposes the neutrality stance. And I think countries have got the right to ask that, are you neutral or not? First, we cannot continue to walk left and talk right as a country.
So, is the view of business that BRICS is not a representation, as the minister puts it, of a maybe change, but she uses a political term, says a geopolitical revolution that will represent a breaking away from the past?
And it absolutely is. But you see, I don't think that this is a question of either or, Thabo. It's a question of and, together at the same time. We need all the help we can get as a country. We need all the support we can get. If the president stood at the State of the Nation address and said that we need to try and get 2 trillion rands of investment into the country, we need to therefore look at where that investment is going to come from. And it will be naive for us as a country to think that we can only massage the East relationships, to the exclusion of everyone else. South Africa needs the help from everywhere it can get it. Thabo, we're sitting with 48% unemployment in terms of the expanded definition. It is a recipe for disaster. The domestic inequality and the social instability that we have in this country, the 65% youth unemployment is the biggest risk that we actually have in this country. And we therefore need to look at how do we actually leverage all the relationships, Thabo, not just BRICS, all the relationships that we have as a country to make sure that we can grow our economy at the right levels. Because only when we grow our economy at the right levels do we then, start to make a serious stand on the very worrying levels of unemployment that we actually have in this country. Don't get me started about everything else that is not going right in this country, because we need all the help we can get in as far as those are concerned as well. When you're talking about our environment not being conducive, it suggests that for us to be able to get the environment to operate as it should, we need the support. But we also need the investment and the support that we can get from all the international communities, in spite of our problems, to still continue betting on South Africa, because they believe, that we are going to turn the corner. So if we are going to start alienating certain people, it doesn't over well, for the country, not especially when the international sentiment is what it is about South Africa at the moment. Because, Thabo, the reality of the situation is that the international community and the investor community have actually taken a dim view on South Africa. They are very worried about where the country is at the moment. So the last thing you want to do, is act as if you don't need all those partners, and you therefore start making irresponsible statements like that. It is totally unacceptable. Thabo, we are currently borrowing 2 billion rands a day as a country, just to balance our books. This is not to build new factories. This is not to create new jobs. It is just to make sure that we can honor our commitments as a country. Where do you think that 2 billion rands a day is coming from? So this is precisely the reason why I'm saying it is absolutely irresponsible, for us to be making those statements. Let's agree that all the relationships that we have as a country are important, because we need all the help we can get at the moment.
Somebody listening to our conversation in the context of the debate around the scramble for Africa, right? And you already mentioned that already China is making its own way into the African continent. India, to an extent as well, making its way into the African continent, all scrambling for raw material, raw resources. And they're listening to you. They would say, if we got to a point where we had to choose, it sounds as if business in South Africa would want to lean more to the west than they would want to lean to the east.
But that's the point. Why would we have to choose? There is no one putting a gun to our heads saying that we actually need to choose. And if the suggestion is that the U.S. is doing so, I'm saying that the U.S. has actually said to government, are you neutral or not in as far as Russia is concerned? And if that is considered bullying, then I don't understand how that is therefore characterized as bullying, because then they are asking a question that we would all like to have an answer to. Are we aligned with Russia or are we not? Are we neutral or are we not? Because the actions that we've actually taken as a country scream non-neutrality, and they actually need explaining by the government. I think we have seen a lot of CEOs come out, in response to Lady R, and they've actually been reflecting the sentiments of their principals who are sitting outside of the country, who are very worried about the geopolitics that we're entering in, and who are actually very worried about where South Africa is at the moment, so CEOs need to be able to give very clear answers to their principals, and the business community would also like to know what the response is in as far as our stance with Russia, because we need to choose a side.
So if you were to be really clear in what you're saying to the minister, you are saying to the minister, be careful of your comments. We can't afford to lose our relationship with the West.
We can't afford to lose our relationships with anyone. We should present BRICS, Thabo, as an opportunity to drive the economic development for its member nations, an outcome that the West and all friends of South Africa would see positively. We should not use BRICS, as a wedge, against South Africa and the West, because having BRICS doesn't mean having to denounce all the other relationships that we actually have with the world, especially the relationship with the West.
Appreciate your time. Thank you very much for coming on. Busisiwe Mavuso, the CEO of Business Leadership South Africa.